play with fire. You want to be conservative.
It sounds like having an SMS campaign is kind of like having a paper target on your back if you're not doing it the right.
Professional plaintiffs that will opt themselves into a campaign, then they'll get 20 messages in the course of 6 months, or in some of your cases, in the case of 2 or 3 days in some, right? Depending on the use case. And then they'll send a demand.
So I get text messages on my phone all the time, unsolicited, from other agents or other companies that are trying to start a conversation with me about, working with them. And not one of them have had any sort of opt-out data, none of the disclosures we've talked about today. So joining me today is Omer Samiri. Omer has owned his own text messaging SMS platform called iVisionMobile for 16 years, since 2006. He is what I would consider an expert in the text messaging SMS space. And when it comes to buying life insurance leads or generating your own life insurance leads, I think there's a lot of misinformation circling around YouTube, circling around the internet, and I want to make sure that everybody continues to have a lot of business, write a lot of business, but stay in compliant at the same time. We don't want to get sued. So welcome, Omer.
Thank you for having me, Dana. I appreciate your time.
I have been looking forward to this interview all week. It's like nails on a chalkboard when I hear bad information. And just to give you an example of some of the stuff I hear, people are telling agents to text message their leads like 3 to 5 to 8 to 10 times a day, just bombard them with text messages until they get on the phone. And I don't know, something about that scares me. I don't think that's the right way to go about it, but I wanted to bring you on so we can kind of start from the beginning, like talking about like TCPA, what the heck even is that, and kind of work our way down from there. So let's start with that. So what is TCPA and why do people need to understand what that is?
So the TCPA stands for the Telephone Consumer Protection Act. It was a federal law that came out in 1991. And it came out when we would be sitting down to dinner with our families and the phone would start ringing from telemarketing calls during the dinner hour. And so Congress passed a TCPA that was meant to protect consumers like you and I from unsolicited marketing communication that we didn't ask to receive. Fast forward to 2013, and the government felt like the TCPA needed to be revised to support some of the newer methods of communication, such as text messaging. So in 2013, it was amended. And basically, there were 2 big changes to the TCPA in 2013. Number one is that there's this notion of an established business relationship, which no longer exists for marketers and for businesses, meaning that if you and I had met on the street and I gave you my business card, even though we didn't do business or transact in business, we established a business relationship. Mm-hmm. And that gave me the green light then to reach out to you every day and solicit your business because there was an established business relationship there. And there's this gray area for marketers. And so in 2013, one of the big changes was basically that there's no longer this notion of an established business relationship. That has to go away. And instead now you need what's called prior express written consent from consumers to engage in any type of ongoing marketing communication. And I say ongoing marketing communication specifically because the TCPA only applies to anything that's ongoing and marketing related. It does not apply to one-off communication, and it also does not apply to non-marketing communication, which might be more like transactional messages pertaining to a doctor's appointment or a bill that must be due, might be
like
due.
A school or something that is more like emergency related.
Correct. So a smart business will probably still want to gather some type of consent in order to text message people, but the threshold for establishing that consent goes much lower when you're not doing ongoing marketing.
Okay, so first question then that comes to mind is there's probably two or three different ways that that agents in the life insurance space get their leads. So they're either A or one, buying them from third-party aggregates, right, who are generating the leads themselves and then selling off that data. Number two, people are self-generating leads through Facebook, YouTube, Google PPC. And I would even say three, there is a lot of direct mail leads. So people are filling out a form and they're mailing that back in to have somebody contact them for more information about life insurance. Or I guess they could just be calling directly in, to a television commercial or where that direct call is made to get more information. So I guess those are kind of four different channels, but in all those four channels, and I kind of want to break them down, do any of those provide expressed written consent to text message as often as you want?
Well, it depends. So let's talk about those. You brought up the first category, which is purchase leads. Mm-hmm. So that to me is a red flag, because buying phone number data to text message is really not something that exists in the United States or something that's very commonplace. As a consumer, you need to give express written consent and you need to know what you're opting into. So even though you might be going on some website and filling out a form to get more information on a policy, life insurance, health insurance, whatever it might be, mm-hmm. does not mean that you've now opted in to receiving marketing communication from 100 different agents that are in your area. And that is the reality of what happens, is that data that you submit on that form then gets sold 100 different ways. And now you have all these agents trying to communicate with you. So that's certainly not the intent. And that's falls under the category of affiliate marketing. And that's something that the carriers do not allow in their terms of service. So there's TCPA rules, which, govern federal law. And then there are carrier guidelines, which govern what the carriers allow on their networks. And there's some overlap, but they're different, and the penalties are different. And so it's just important to understand what you can and cannot do.
Okay, so let's pause there for a second because I have so many questions. So let's still talking about this this purchase lead scenario. A lot of these websites are claiming to be TCPA compliant, that they're scrubbed against the DNC list, that they are scrubbed against the litigators list, which I also want to talk about as well. And so that possibly gives agents who are buying those leads maybe a false sense of security that gives them the green light to go ahead and market to leads however they want. So can you speak to that?
Yes, I can. So I think, it's always really important to put yourself in the perspective of the consumer. And so you want to do what's reasonable for the consumer and what's reasonable for you as a consumer. And so if you are acquiring a list, unless you vetted the source of that data, what website it came from, what the disclaimer language looked like on that website, there's very specific language that needs to be present on any type of web form or call to action where people are joining alerts. And that disclaimer language needs to reference the type of communication, the frequency of the communication, the fact that people can reply stop or help to opt out or receive additional information on the campaign. The message and data rates may apply. And then a link to a terms and conditions and privacy policy. And those are the elements that make for a complete disclaimer. And so the first question I would ask if I was acquiring a list from a lead provider is, where's that data coming from? And can I see that form to make sure that it checks all the boxes in terms of disclaimer language? Beyond that, once you acquire the data, I think there needs to be a certain due diligence there to realize that these people are not wanting 1,000 different agents to solicit them. So there should probably be some type of additional outreach to at least gauge interest and have them reply yes to receive additional communication. And then in terms of frequency, what's appropriate to message them? Is it appropriate to message them 5 times a day? Probably not, because you as a consumer would not want to receive 5 messages in one day. So it has to be reasonable, reasonable to a normal person.
Is it compliant though? See, I think the question there is it compliant though for someone to send 5 text messages a day if all the boxes are checked?
If on that initial form that the consumer filled out on a website says, I agree to receive 5 messages a day, up to 150 messages a month from so-and-so insurance agency, then yes, then you've disclaimer to the consumer, the frequency that you're messaging them. The consumer still completed the form and gave you their express written consent. So in that perspective, from that regard, yes, you would have the green light to message them, but you're not going to see that because most businesses, most brands are not messaging their customers 5 times a day. If I was messaged 5 times in one day by my local pizzeria or any one of my other clients that uses our text messaging software, I would probably opt out. There's very specific use cases that require more than 1 message a day. Sports teams, you have a team, you're a fan, you want it all, right? Send me a pregame message, a mid-game message, a post-game message, trade alerts, player updates, score updates, give it all, right? I'll take 10 messages a day. But that's probably the one exception to multiple messages a day. Everything else is not that.
I think probably where a lot of the mentality is setting is, when people are buying leads, of course, those leads are going to multiple agents. And so it's almost like a race to the finish. And so if I only send 1 message and no more, someone else might get them. And I think that's what people might be thinking. And so let's talk about, though, what that initial message needs to say, because that initial message is also incredibly important when it comes to staying compliant with the carriers. Is that correct?
An initial message that you might send to somebody should confirm what they've opted into, should reiterate the frequency of the messaging, should provide some help contact information if the consumer needs help, and then should give them the ability to reply, stop to cancel, and let them know that message and data rates may apply.
So can you, I know I'm putting you on the spot with this, but can you give me an example as in like life insurance language? So I would reach out and say, hey, Victor, I saw you recently, inquired to get information on, to protect your family for life insurance. Is now a good time, right? And then below that, it says what?
Before that, you would say something like, hello, Victor. This is Dana from so-and-so agency calling to talk to you about your life insurance request for information. Reply yes to communicate via text.
Oh, okay. So do I have to state, so do the agents have to state their name and the company that they're representing? You were just giving that as an example.
So you're trying to get the person to reply yes. So you want that message to come off as conversational as possible instead of generic. That's good. You can send a generic text that says, reply yes to get communication from so-and-so insurance agency, but you haven't personalized it with the consumer's name. That's a huge aspect of the response. So if you can personalize the message to them, hey, Victor, hey, Susie, hey, Dana, hey, Omer, then you're going to increase your response rates, number one. And then I personally feel that you're going to soften up because that message, don't forget, is coming out of the blue. They didn't just fill out that form. They may have filled out the form a week ago, 2 weeks ago, a month ago. And now their data is getting to you. And now you're messaging those people. And so it's going to catch them off guard. So the best way not to create a negative connotation, a negative response to that message, is to make it read more personal, as if you're initiating a conversation as opposed to like a generic text broadcast.
Can you start it by saying like, hi, is this Dana?
Well, you haven't gotten their consent yet.
Well, that's what I'm saying, because I know a lot of people do that. And where's that line? Where is that line?
I think that exacerbates the problem, because you're going to get more consumers that are not going to recognize a number. They're not going to know who the messages came from, and they're going to flag that message as spam in their phone. And then they're going to block it. And so then even if the agent is sending that person 4 or 5 messages a day, guess what? The agent's paying for all those messages. It's never getting to the end destination. And you're still incurring the cost to deliver those messages. So it only exacerbates the problem, because you're going to get more messages flagged as spam. you're going to send more messages that are not ultimately going to get to their destination. So you don't want to be vague and generic. You want to be specific and personal and try to build a relationship. And that's how you're going to get that traction and that person responding back.
So basically that initial message, conversational, and then followed by a question, is it okay to continue to receive messages?
Yeah. Is it okay to text?
Yes. Is it okay to text you? And then
always establish that consent for sure.
And then they give you the consent. And then you had also said something earlier about how you have to always have like text stop to opt out, or message and data rates may apply. Where does that go?
So that should go on the initial call to action before somebody has joined the alerts, and should also exist in the first message that they've received that confirms that they've opted in. Beyond that, the carriers don't really necessarily require it on every outbound message. And I guess really that's where it really comes down to the use case. You know, if you're doing a chat back and forth via text, you probably don't need to include that disclaimer language on every outbound message. But if you are messaging these people once a month, once every other month, maybe it's with updates about upcoming deadlines, rate changes, open enrollment, who knows what the case might be, marketing type communication, you should probably include that disclaimer, the reply stop to cancel on every outbound message, just to make it easier. What we're trying to do here is make it easy for the consumer to understand who's messaging them, to consent to messaging, and to easily opt out. And the better we can do that, the more relevant and effective text messaging is.
Is there a difference between manual message from someone's cell phone? So I'm an independent agent. I just work for myself. I generate my own leads through Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Google PPC. Maybe I buy some leads, and I'm doing all my communication from my cell phone, not using any sort of system or anything like that. Is there a difference in compliance, or is it the same?
There's a difference in technology and capabilities, and in user friendliness.
But as far as being compliant, the same rules apply.
The same rules apply if you're going to use it for marketing purposes. You have to abide by the carrier and the TCPA guidelines. When you're messaging somebody on your personal cell phone, and most people don't know this, it's person-to-person messaging, which is a whole different network and animal than commercial messaging. And your carrier, even though you don't know it, will start limiting your messages and spacing them out after you send out about 200 in one day. So if you're sending more than 200 messages, those messages start to get farther and farther apart. And so some people think that they can message thousands of people by creating different groups on their cell phones and trying to broadcast large messages, to multiple recipients from their cell phone. That doesn't work so well, because those messages start getting delivered the next day, and 2 days later, 3 days later. And so that's why commercial messaging exists. And so you don't want to necessarily be doing that on your phone, because it's not very conducive to being functional. And so you want to use a company like iVision, which is web-based software, to log into it and administer that large volume messaging.
And even if they have a system in place like iVision, they still have to understand compliance laws. Like, you're just giving them the vehicle and the tool to make it easier for them, but you're not responsible for them like being compliant with when they send their messages, right?
Well, on the contrary, actually, the compliance goes all the way up the chain, and we are liable for anything that our clients do potentially. And we've had issues with clients doing stuff in the past, and that comes all the way up the chain to us, or even beyond us to the upstream global aggregators. So anybody that's in the chain of communication is technically liable. So it's our responsibility as a provider to educate our clients and to train them on what they can and cannot do. A big misconception is, hey, that person's a customer, I should be able to message them. And that's not
or lead or customer, or one and the same.
Or customer, lead or customer. Because remember, this whole notion of a business relationship went down the drain in 2013. You need to have express written consent. Just because a person ordered a pizza from you last week does
Mm-hmm.
not mean that they've consented to receiving your text alerts.
Right,
Not
right.
the same.
I did read about some lawsuits from like Steve Madden and Pizza Hut and a couple other pretty large lawsuits because they were sent unsolicited, large groups of people being sent unsolicited text messages.
And that's no different than the insurance agency, which is, looking at people that are existing policyholders and messaging those people, letting them know, hey, your open enrollment's coming up or your policy is lapsing on so-and-so date and you have a renewal. You need to have people's consent. Now that, again, the bar might be a little bit lower because you're dealing with a transactional message specific to that person and their policy and when it's
expired. Right. Not a group.
It's not so much marketing, but it's kind of marketing. There's a gray area there, And so again, in this industry, you want to err on the side of caution. You want to be more conservative than cavalier. You don't want to play with fire. You want to be conservative.
It sounds like having an SMS campaign is kind of like having a paper target on your back if you're not doing it the right way. How often do professional litigators and professional people scour the internet, making sure people are compliant just to catch you and put you in a lawsuit?
A really interesting point is that, we live in a litigious society in the United States. And ever since 2013, when the TCPA was amended, it was amended in a way that was kind of vague and ambiguous. And that opened up the door to all this unsolicited litigation that is mostly frivolous. And obviously there are some real TCPA violations, but the majority of them are brought upon by professional plaintiffs, litigious attorneys that are enterprising attorneys that are looking for loopholes to try to take advantage or basically extort money from legitimate businesses. And most of these cases don't even see the light of day in court. They get settled. But because the TCPA has really opened up the door to all this, it just, like I said, it means that we as consumers, as business owners, have to be more careful to know what to do and what not to do. So we're not doing something that's going to open ourselves up to potential class action lawsuits. But yes, we've had clients, we've been around for 16 years, and there are professional plaintiffs that will opt themselves into a campaign. Then they'll get 20 messages in the course of 6 months, or in some of your cases, in the case of 2 or 3 days, in some cases, right? Depending on the use case. And then they'll send a demand letter. And they'll say, hey, this is so-and-so, letting you know I opted in to this campaign. It's not compliant. You're in violation of TCPA. I'm demanding that you write me a check for $2,000 before I turn this into a class action lawsuit. And they send out hundreds of these letters nationwide to hundreds of businesses. And then they sit back and collect these checks from businesses. And it's a demand letter. And then, and businesses can treat it one of several ways. They can disregard those letters and hope that they don't materialize to something more. They can negotiate and pay less, which we've had clients do, or they can just write a check and not ask any questions. We've had clients do that as well. Most times we tell our clients just to ignore them because these guys are, sending out hundreds of these lawyers and they're hoping that somebody's going to pay the check, basically.
Now, remind me, I want to talk about Florida, but before I do, let's pretend someone does get a demand letter, they ignore it, and it ends up being a much bigger issue, and they do, and end up and find themselves in a lawsuit. Paying $2,000 to a demand letter seems like a much better scenario than the alternative, which will end up being what, $500 to $1,500 per out of violation text. Is that correct?
Potentially, that would be the penalties, not including legal fees and things of that nature. So, it can be easily in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, depending on the size of the database that you're messaging and the frequency, and how long you've been doing it. And sometimes these class action lawsuits don't materialize for 2 or 3 years. So you've been messaging people for 2 or 3 years in violation of TCPA. So there's quite a bit of.
That'll bankrupt you.
Penalties, yeah, to make again, most of these cases don't see the light of day, and they want to get money out and they want to do it quickly. But it's still, legal fees, and takes a year to get through it before you're out.
Yeah.
I think that you have to be careful. You have to be careful, and there's always somebody there looking to take advantage when you have a target on your back as any business. It could be the small mom and pop on the corner or a large brand. I think we're all equally, at the mercy of people out there.
So some states are more strict than others. And I was reading there are 13 states that are the most strict. I'm just going to read this list really quick, and then I want to specifically focus on one. So the ones that I've read that are the most strict as far as really enforcing compliance laws are Arizona, California, Colorado, Connecticut, Florida, Indiana, New Jersey, North Dakota, Oklahoma, Rhode Island, Utah, Washington, and Wisconsin. Now, of those, Florida seems to stand out as one of the most strict states. And I don't know how much you're familiar with that or not, but from what we were told, because we have a compliance attorney to make sure everything we do, and to be honest, we don't even have a text message campaign. We don't even go there. We're a little bit afraid to go there at the moment. So for Florida, we were told you can only send messages to a Florida lead 3 times in one day. And that's all forms of communication. That includes phone calls, that includes text messages, that includes emails. 3 times max. What have you heard that? Do you have anyone in Florida, clients in Florida?
We have clients in Florida, and we work with clients across multiple industries. And, insurance is one of those verticals that is very state specific and state regulated, whereas text messaging is federal. So we have to abide by federal law. We don't really get too deep into state by state issues, nor have we had any issues with clients on a state level. It's always been federal. And if there's going to be a class action case, it's going to go federal. It has to be federal for a TCPA violation. Specific to different industries, whether it's debt settlement, debt collection, insurance, you're going to have, and even legal in Florida recently gave lawyers the ability to text message people for marketing, for solicitation. And so we had a huge influx of attorneys that would reach out to us asking all these questions about compliance in Florida. At the end of the day, you're going to have state-specific mandates of what you can and cannot do per vertical, specific to insurance, things like that. It all comes down on a federal level to that prior express written consent from consumers. And if you can establish that, then it's just a matter of what you told the consumer. If you told the consumer, hey, this gives us you're going to reply yes to opt into 30 messages per day, that's what you have the ability to do, because you've gotten that express written consent. I don't think under any circumstance should you be messaging a prospect more than 3 times a day. Because again, it comes down to what's reasonable and what's acceptable for a typical consumer. And strip away insurance and strip away Florida and strip away that aspect of it, and just the fact that you're messaging a prospect 3 times in one day, that's aggressive. And I think that's what Florida is trying to crack down on, is some of those aggressive tactics that are really excessive to the average consumer. And so scale that back. There's no reason to message somebody 3 times a day.
Sure. Right. And then, so let's pretend someone is messaging 3 times a day, morning, noon, and night, like the initial text, text stop to opt out, whatever verbal language they have to use, and no one responds. So then they send a message out a few hours later, just checking in again, whatever that verbiage says. Do they also have to put in that text stop to opt out? Like, should they do that until somebody actually responds and engages? Or does that not matter as much?
I'm a big advocate of putting that in every outbound message.
Okay.
And if somebody's not responding, there's a reason. They don't like the messages. They're not interested in what you have to offer. And that's a sign if somebody's not responding to your text. If there's no engagement, if there's no response back, that should be a sign that after X amount of messages, just stop messaging them. But again, if you haven't gotten their consent in the first place to message them, you shouldn't be messaging them more than once. So it all comes
So the other types of leads that I had talked about in the beginning, the direct mail leads, and when someone calls you directly. So this isn't where someone had put their information in on a web form to opt into something. Let's say someone's getting a direct mail lead, right? Where someone, put in their information to reach out.
You sent them a form in the mail that says, get more information, and they've completed that form.
Filled it out
to you with a prepaid stamp or whatever.
Yes.
So that form that they're filling out should be a checkbox and disclaimer language that says, please check this box to receive text communication from so-and-so agency. Message frequency may vary.
And if it doesn't say that, then what?
Then you don't have the person's consent, and you can send them a one-time message. But you cannot assume that they've given you their consent, because they haven't.
It's good that you can still send one message to ask for consent, though, right? That
message in forever until they respond. You can send it over and over again.
And no follow-up messages. Okay, so if someone calls you on the phone, is this something that I can just ask them? Do I have your permission to send you text messages? Like, how do I have proof that they gave that to me?
That's a great question. So the best way to handle phone consent is if you do have some type of recording of the call, and you have that, and you're able to read that disclaimer language on the audio call and have the person give a verbal yes. That's the best way to do it. Another way to do it is to set up what we call a double opt-in campaign. So when you're on the phone with the prospect, you can say, would you like to receive text message communication? Okay, no problem. I'm gonna key in what's your phone number? I'm gonna send you a prompt. Please reply yes. And so you type in the phone number, it triggers a message to that person saying, please reply yes to get text communication from Dana at so-and-so. And it gives all the disclaimer language in the message. And then you have to, again, reply yes to be opted in. But now you're facilitating a consent via text from the phone call.
Got it. Okay, that makes a lot of sense, because I really think that it is just like the wild, wild west out there. And I really hope that people are finding a lot of value from this information. And if somebody wants to reach you directly, like if they're interested in setting up a mobile campaign and they really connect with you and want to learn more from you, Omer, how do they get in touch with you?
The best way is to just find us online and submit the contact form. It's iVisionMobile, the letter I, the word vision, and the word mobile, iVisionMobile.com. We've been around for 16 years. We have about 9,000 businesses across the country that use our software across just about every vertical and niche, whether it's healthcare, financial, education, brick and mortar retail, dining, entertainment, insurance. The list goes on and on. There's certain categories of clients that we cannot service that are federally illegal. So that kind of, negates those industries. But we work with just about every industry, doing every type of communication, marketing or non-marketing communication.
Is there anything that you think I've missed? Because you don't know what you don't know, right? And I'm trying to help people, put those pieces together so that we can all be in compliance, I should say.
I think we've covered a lot of topics today, but the main takeaway for me, and this is again what I advise all my clients in terms of reasonable best practices, is just if you're ever unsure of what's right, what's not right, does something seem fishy, does it sound a little maybe sketch, or maybe I shouldn't be doing this, just always put yourself in the position of the consumer and say, okay, if I was the one getting these messages, how would I feel? How would I feel when I get 5 messages a day and I haven't responded? How would I feel if I got 1 message a day or 3 messages a week or whatever? So, and I think there's ways to message once you build that list organically for an insurance agency. There's ways to send really useful messages on a regular basis, whether it's payment renewals, whether it's tips for a healthy life, like we have car washes that do it. They send messages about how to take care of your car so that you don't have to get a lot of car washes. You can take care of your car at home. And so these are things that are kind of relevant to the car wash industry. So what's relevant to the insurance world that you can communicate with your insurance clients about? that might not necessarily be about selling them additional,
right,
but something that's just going to benefit what you're offering them.
I think a lot of people are doing that in their email marketing too, which is a whole other topic.
So text messaging is one other form of communication. And when you strip away the fact that it's text messaging, it's okay, what are you doing to communicate with your customers, with your prospects, with your employees? We have agencies, insurance agencies actually, that use our software to communicate with all their agents. They might have 100+ agents, and they use text messaging to communicate with their agents about continuing education and all kinds of stuff, benefit changes. So it's really just a matter of stripping away the text messaging component and saying, okay, what are we doing as a business to communicate? Who are we communicating with? Prospects, staff, employees, customers. And then how do we now incorporate text messaging into this communication? Because we all know that nowadays people prefer texting.
I do have one more question, because you brought up something that I did want to ask you about, and you just made me think of it now. So in this same space, I would say people are as equally aggressive at recruiting one another. And so a lot of the life insurance industry, for the most part, is really like a pyramid scheme, in disguise. And people are recruiting other people so they can profit off of them, and so on and so forth. Not on my team, but the majority of how other, IMOs and life insurance companies work. So I get text messages on my phone all the time, unsolicited, from other agents or other companies that are trying to start a conversation with me about, working with them. And not one of them have had any sort of opt-out data, none of the disclosures we've talked about today. But because I know a little bit more than the average Joe, I will typically reply and say, I did not opt into this. This is out of compliance, but really, like, what should people know about sending text messages to people like me? And if they do send messages to people like me, and I know they're not in compliant, I mean, that's obviously setting themselves up for a lawsuit on a different front, right? Just in the recruiting side.
Yeah. I mean, compliance is compliance, whether you're messaging for a life insurance policy or trying to hire staff. And I get those messages all day long as well that just go right into my spam folder that I mark as spam. So it's, a TCPA class action law. It's not like you can go file one on the corner every time you get a message from somebody and you go after them. I mean,
right. No,
it's a little bit of work to go through the process, but it's this big, nasty snowball effect of spam, and the carriers are trying to root all that out. So the carriers over the last few years have been working towards a registry for verifying 10-digit numbers and registering them on behalf of the carriers. And they want to know which phone number belongs to which brand so they can root out that spam. So there's those providers that let that traffic go through their pipes. We're a lot more conservative on our end in terms of vetting clients and making sure that they're using the system correctly with proper consent. And until those other providers, really get on the wagon here and follow the same consent rules that everybody else is, you're going to see some of that continue until the carrier is really rooted out, which is
so it's all just kind of an honors system.
It's an honor system, and the carriers have been actively working in that direction. So I think you'll start to see a lot of changes in the coming year or two.
So the point is, put your best practices in place now. Make sure you're doing the right thing now, so that if it does end up getting changed or more restricted in the future, that you already have that set up and systems in place so that you're always doing the right thing.
100%.
Good. Well, thank you, Omer. I really appreciate you being on here, and I hope I'll put all your contact information below if someone wants to reach out to you to get more information on how to be compliant in SMS. And I hope you have a good rest of your day.
Not you too.
Thank you.